In our agenda, we start with the minutes, right?
Yes.
If I remember, last time we did this, unless there are any proposed edits, we just accept them as is.
You can ask if there's any changes or corrections.
Are there any
If
changes?
there are none, then you can put them on file. That's
Okay.
correct.
All right. Are there any changes or corrections to the minutes from our last meeting? Hearing none, we can put them on file.
Great. And I also want to introduce Andy Atala, who's our summer intern and already started on a couple projects, which we can talk about later. But if this committee has specific requests for him, those can be prioritized.
Should we quickly introduce ourselves?
Yes,
Andy, if
it'd
we
be
have our-
helpful.
yeah. Do you want to start, Mary?
Marianne Cooley, I'm the chair of the select board.
Nice to meet you, Rachel, right?
We know each other. Stephen Craig.
Nick Hill, last year.
And you've met
Yeah,
Cecilia,
we met.
and I'm Hank Haff.
Catherine Copley, and then we have Kevin Keane and Marty Crocker online.
And then
I'm ready. This is Cindy Gonzalez.
so I think our first order of business today is to introduce Kate, who's going to talk to us about the CEA
Correct.
research. So
I brought some.
Yeah.
So again, I'm Kate Fitzpatrick, town manager. I haven't met everybody. I think we met many years ago.
Yes, you're right.
Yes.
Yes. Cindy is here, also Stephen, to let you know what we can do to help you. You asked me to come and talk about the concept of community energy aggregation and where we might go from here. And I put to you through Hank and Catherine, the MAPC's toolkit. Did you see that? It's really very comprehensive. And you probably had all seen it before. And then our support services manager, Miles, did a quick analysis of some of our comparable communities and where they stand. And so just thought that would be helpful information for you. And I know it will be helpful for the select board. So we actually had a conversation with our a couple of our providers, Power Options and Freedom Energy, who are in the business of both working with community energy aggregation and also with communities on their own municipal power supply purchasing, which there are ways that the town could specify greener energy when we renew our contract. So that's something we talked to the select board about. It seems to make sense. The difficulty right now is the energy prices are skyrocketing. Just kind of an odd time to be doing this, but it takes a year and a half. So, so I guess the question for this committee is, I understand this is something that you think is important. I do think from a cost perspective, it's low-hanging fruit. I think it's a bandwidth issue for staff, but I'm, depending on the goals that the board sets, I'm confident that this is something we can take on. Because the first step would be for the committee to ask the select board to take it up this in fiscal year 23, and the board starts discussing its goals on August 3rd. So before that would be helpful. And if the board decides to do it, the first step is to put a warrant article on, and we have time to do that for October 24th. So that's the first step. And then if town meeting agrees, then we would issue an RFP. You don't have to, but I do actually think it's a good idea. There's 3 main providers in the consulting space for this work. And since the green meeting day. We spent a lot of time together getting that green communities done. It just seems like, yeah. And here we are again.
Yeah.
So there are 3 key providers, Colonial. I had their names. I don't think but there's 3. That's the big one. And so the beauty of this project is they do most of the work. So once, and the other thing is that they get paid by the supplier, so we don't have to pay anything. That's how, when the town purchases its energy from the supplier, that's the same with our consultant financially. So they would develop the plan, we would work on the plan together with the OER, then they have to file it with the DPU, and that process can take time. Hank and I are engaged in the, trying to get approval for a waiver for our solar array to install on the Jack Cogswell building, because there's already a solar array. Does seem counter to state policy.
Excuse, the remote people, please put themselves on mute. Thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
Pro tip, you know, you can do that to them too. It's nicer to ask.
We need to speak louder because when it records, when you listen to it, it's hard to hear people
Yeah.
with the owl.
With the owl, yeah, yeah. So again, Hank and I are engaged in a long process with the DPU. It's just everything takes a long time. I'm sure their staffing is down. Virtually all state offices are still remote, so it's very, very complicated. The communities that we've talked to have said that their consultants have set up their own websites that we would direct to. They've set up the call centers. They do all of the informational mailings, and they do all the mailings to the customers. And so because that's the way this program is set up, I think this is something we could do, start more quickly. And it is nice to get something started. The most recent conversation I had with Newton, and they had changed their offering array, and the mayor said that there really had been very little pushback. They have cards in their office, and people come and complain. They'll even help them do it right there, opt down, because you can opt down. So the question, other than asking for you to request the select board to go down this path, I would think that it would be helpful if one or two who are available could help us through the RFP process. Steer that, I think it would be really good. And maybe report back to the committee. That would be helpful. Basically, be looking at about a year and a half.
Until an implementation.
And Kate, it is actually a discussion point with whether it's opt-in or opt-out, but it seems like most communities have gone the opt-out way, and there have not been a lot of repercussions. So we're thinking that that's possible. Is that true?
I don't know. Has anybody gone opt-in? I don't think so.
Okay.
The only opt-in is if you want to switch from, let's say.
To a
You have your own
higher
provider.
Yeah, you have your own provider, you have to opt in. So there's a little bit of confusion.
That's
on
right.
that.
Okay.
So anybody who's already got a contract would have to opt in. That's
And
right.
if you come off of your contract, you have to then, but that's an education.
Right. So the other thing that we would be doing as a policy matter would be recommending at what level people are defaulted. It seems to be there's only one community that we looked at who's defaulting to the minimum. Most communities are being at least a little aspirational.
And Boston has a 30%, 30, then minimum, and then 100%.
Okay.
As minimum, well, now it's 2.
The other thing that to note on the memo is that all of these contracts were bid before the current energy environment, so it's not to say we'll get those numbers, but people are buying out as far as 2025.
So Kate, if we were to get to the end of the consultancy process and the bids come back and they just seem like they're not a great idea, can we stop the process at that point? Or, and if we stop the process, what would we owe the consultant?
Nothing.
Okay.
Yeah, we asked the ones that we talked to directly, and they said they do it at their risk.
Okay.
And of course, is that the delta is going to be the delta. So if the Eversource rate isn't going to stay where it is, right? So it's still just going to be a delta. And because people can opt down, or you might decide, well, this isn't the time to default people up.
Yeah. And Eversource changes every 6 months. So
Right.
currently they're going to be 18 cents starting in July. So it makes the aggregations, makes 100% green wonderful.
We could get to the point at the end where we say, these rates, we think they're going to come down over the next, I don't know, 6 months to a year. maybe hold off on the implementation of the contract.
And you can also change your mix, right? From, I'm no expert, but I understand, buying 100% mass Rex is more expensive than green power that's being created somewhere else, like Texas wind, which is what some of them are using. right now. So there's different ranges for the green. There isn't enough green power. Well, this is how I understand it. There isn't enough green power out there for everybody to do this, but all of the time that you're buying this incentive, you're encouraging more entities to create more green, and then eventually they'll be available. But when Lexington says 100%, they're buying quite a bit of Texas. We're putting money into Texas for them. But I think Brookline is one of the ones that's doing all mass rights. Boston is also, we didn't do Boston. We didn't do Boston. So,
I don't really understand what the benefit is of Rex versus the all power. I mean, I understand with all the power that if you're investing in Texas wind, right, you're greening the grid somewhere else, which certainly still has a value. But the Rex do what exactly?
I'm no expert.
It's a
Nick is-
mechanism of, it's an accounting mechanism, basically,
Okay.
sort of like shares in a co-op, which is equal. But so you're buying the renewable energy credit, somebody else may be getting the kilowatt hours, but you're getting the greenness that might come, let's say, from the RTS. Those are being sold to
Okay.
somebody as New England Renewable Energy.
Is there a difference in quality between the Rex though? I mean,
No,
there's some
it's
Rex
just-
better than others.
It's just an account, the big thing is, are they being double dipped? Because some less reputable, my understanding is that I can take, if this water were Rex, I could sell 48 ounces under some circumstances, as opposed to just selling the contents. And so that the New England Rex, I think there's a perception of quality and that it's local and so forth.
But it also helps support Cape Wind and those projects
And
that are.
the theory, I think the idea is that by buying New England Energy, we're creating more renewable energy for our local grid.
Which may be more reliable as well. You're not sending it across country.
And reduce the exporting and importing of natural gas for power plants.
So I put up the chart that you had in your memo. And I guess the first question is to have the committee have a resolution or something that requests that the select board proceed with community electrical aggregation.
Do we need that? If we voted last meeting to
Then
make
it
it a
was gonna be
goal,
the top priority, right?
right? It should be the top.
Is that
priority.
sufficient to?
I would
Get
think
the ball
that's
rolling.
sufficient. Yeah.
Okay.
And then would the board come, oh, I guess, would the board come back with questions as far as what do you mean, which we would then use to shape a formal recommendation to go to town meeting?
I don't know that the board will necessarily come back with questions at this stage. I think that will be more the result of an RFP process, but
Okay.
then there will be questions, in response there maybe, but
I would
But I
certainly
think-
think we need to, the board will have to articulate why they're putting it on the warrant and what the benefits are and what will happen.
right.
But so at this point, the ball is in the board's court as opposed to the CAPC.
So, but does a letter or something need to go to the board, the select board, saying that the committee has supported it?
Well, so the question is, if something gets transmitted that has the priorities that were voted on at the last meeting, right, then that I think will convey the request to the board. There certainly may be a request from the board related to town meeting for a memo from this group in support of the action, detailing why it's a priority. But I think the reason why the group talked about it is that it is one of the single biggest levers we can use relating to every household in town, frankly,
And small business.
and small businesses, yeah.
Okay. Kate, you'd also mentioned that you could use someone from the committee to help with the RFP process. I'm assuming that you'd probably want to wait until the select board is prioritizes and the goals to identify who those people are, but in the meantime, we should be thinking, is there someone at this table or in this group who could
It
bring
would be
that?
helpful if, even before the RFP, if there were a couple of people who were dedicated to helping us create our presentation for town meeting, for instance, you
Okay.
know, that kind of thing. So maybe by August.
August?
Yeah.
What sort of expertise are you looking for from the group? Somebody who's been involved with this, it's more technical, or do you need somebody who's more process?
Both.
Both, okay.
So maybe two people.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Questions for Kate on CEOs?
I guess, Kate, when you were talking to the other towns, did you get some examples of RFPs, or that might be something we could always go back to?
So one of the three consultants sent me one. So
Okay.
basically
Use this.
in Word. So it's always helpful.
Please use
Good
that.
We'll of course look
Do
at
I-
other templates, but
Okay.
we have at least something to look at.
Kevin, Artie, or Natasha, any questions for Kate on CEAs?
No, this is great. Thank you.
And then
Great, thank
again,
you.
I have one more question. Do we have any sense of when these prices were negotiated? Is there sort of an expected premium at that point where one might pay for 60%, 80%, 100% green relative to the Eversource nominal rate? Right now, certainly it's a deal with all of them, but when they negotiate, I presume that all of those were a premium, and what would we kind of expect?
I think that's the $64,000 question in terms of what's that differential, and both between the price of conventional power versus the greener power, but also I know when Newton did one of their first aggregations, it was actually higher than the Eversource price for about 6 months or a year because it's a constantly changing market. So presumably whenever we strike the deal, we'll be at par with Eversource. Let's say if we had a base deal. And the
At
question
the
is,
30% level?
well, let's say we did 20%, or would, by then maybe the grid is supposed to be at 22%, 23%. The question is, we like to think that there'll be so much renewable energy in 2025 that we won't pay a premium. Right now in Boston, it's about a 3 cent per kilowatt hour differential. Which at the time that was 30% over Eversource.
My understanding was the consultants would lay out for you like every 1% what, it would cost, 1% renewable, it would cost on the rate. The team could evaluate those and make a recommendation. I guess my question for you is, if people are out there buying already on their own supply contracts, do you think they would switch, or your pocketbook issue? Or?
Yeah, I mean, professionally, I've done it partially based on cost, but also because it's easier. I have a customer who wanted to go green in Cambridge, and they just said, "Oh, let's jump on the aggregation and do 100%."
Okay.
So it's for a mid-sized customer, they definitely would look at it.
Somebody else doing the legwork.
Somebody else doing the legwork, and if what the price differential is, or what the hassle factor of doing
Okay.
all green power is. Because it's vetted, that's the other good thing. Is that
Yeah, that is one of the things that consultants kept stressing. It's vetted.
And these are typically 3-year contracts?
Yeah.
3-year contracts. And is the intent to align it with the municipal contract as well, so that the town and all of the residents and small businesses are on the same recommend?
I don't think we qualify for the same rating structure. I'm not an expert on that, but we have a contract through December 24. But we are looking at whether it makes sense earlier than the summer of 24 to be looking out because we can extend it out. So different from this project, we'll be looking at that over the summer and the fall, probably talking about that too.
And I presume you would have enough expertise from your memo and elsewhere to do any FAQ summary, or is that something you want this committee to brainstorm on as well?
Well, it sounds like Nick knows an awful lot, so if he's willing, which I knew.
And I'm sure other communities that have already done this
Yeah.
have FAQs.
The consultants do as well.
Yeah.
Right, so but the initial FAQ for going to town meeting. we would not-
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
we will
right.
have to put it in.
I think we have some people within Green Needham who've done a lot of like work on
Great,
digging through the plans and talking to this fellow from Medfield who on this information. So
I mean,
One-
the basics, like, why is it good for me?
yeah.
How does it help the
Exactly right.
environment?
One
How
of
much
his-
does it cost?
One of his caveats was to never state that you may get a rate lower.
Yeah.
than you ever- like, never say that.
Our finance director would never let us do that,
Yeah.
ever.
So we need to be careful about representation. Even if it has happened,
Mhm.
it's not the intent, not the guarantee.
Yeah, I did a quick Google and found like 6 communities at the top of it with FAQs, so.
yeah,
Okay.
Good. Do you have anything else to say?
No,
Um,
you had questions for Cindy?
Yeah, so we had questions for Cindy. Actually, before we went there, we did have one question about the greenhouse gas inventory. And so we talked a little bit about the town is working with MAPC on a municipal greenhouse gas inventory. Separately, Green Needham had prepared a town-wide greenhouse gas inventory with MAPC toolkit. And we had a conversation about whether or not we should vet that with some experts. And I think the estimate was 3,000 to 5,000.
I thought that was what MAPC.
Yeah.
said.
So it's a $3,000 to $5,000. So I think you answered this in an email that the town doesn't. Or
Well,
can't spend that?
I can't use our energy budget because it's for non-municipal.
Right.
So I didn't know that it was 3 to 5, so I have to search and, but we do have October, I can find 3 to 5 for the town meeting. for sure.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
question is whether this committee would be ready to make a recommendation to the board to have an article for somebody to help write the plan.
Right.
And if you were looking to do that in October, we could just sort of put that all together.
Yeah.
But Hank said that somebody was doing some research on what other towns have paid for a consultant to write the plan.
Yeah.
So 3 to 5 I've got.
Okay. So I've also-
At least a town meeting.
I've also been asking some of the other towns whether it's necessary to have that greenhouse gas inventory done up front, or if it can be done on a parallel track and then dovetail in.
Okay.
I think if it can be done on a parallel track and come in later, it makes sense to wait till November, but if there's some justification or reason why we should have it done up front, we might need to make an ask.
We can discuss that, maybe, should that be a separate agenda item? For that, because it's,
Well, it sounds like it's not an option to do it before November.
I haven't thought about it. The only thing I said it wasn't an option for was to use our energy budget. But I can't. I don't know what else I would use, but I need more time to think about that.
Sure. Okay, we'll follow up.
and
And I'll
we
let
can
you
come,
know
I'll,
if it's necessary.
I could put
And-
together some pros and cons, pros and cons of waiting and dig back into it since we worked on it a few months ago.
Were there any grants from Green Needham or anything to pay for the vetting?
It's a discussion
It was a
topic.
discussion,
It's a discussion topic.
I've kind of given a bit of a, like, gee, is this something that Green Needham might be able to fund if it was proven that there's a reason to
Okay.
do it. So it might be an option if there's an urgency that it can't wait to. Really, let's say January 1.
Yeah. So we'll table that for now and then reconnect.
But if you are looking for consulting assistance, and we haven't talked about it, and I don't know where the board would be, but we need to know that in August. 'cause I-
August,
Okay.
early August.
Yeah,
So we'll have a decision by our next.
Right.
What?
and I haven't talked to Dave about what funds we have available, but
I assume that if we're gonna have an ask, we should try to bundle everything and not just piecemeal.
Yes.
No piecemeal,
Right.
just one ask for the year and done.
I do, Marion, maybe you would agree. Typically, our finance committee and our town meeting would like to know that the committee was formed and that it's working and identify this need. Because sometimes we ask for the money and they say, well, you don't even know if they're gonna need it, even though clearly we're not gonna write this report. So, right. Does that make sense to you, Marion?
Yeah.
Any other questions around greenhouse gas inventory? We talked to Cindy briefly just about how to work with you, and what's the best way to work with you. And I also don't know if we've ever really even talked about what we want to communicate out publicly besides minutes. And to kind of bring the town along on some of these things. So do you have any thoughts?
So I would start, have you set up a webpage, a committee webpage on
Don't-
our?
No, we
Okay, so like that would be the first place to start, and I can certainly work on that with Cecilia. So that's number one, and I would put, if you just voted, for example, on your priorities last meeting, that's something I would put on the webpage, for example. I put your mission, I put the membership, I put your scheduled meetings on there, and then publicize that website exists as a starting point. And then as Stephen, you and I talked, I'll get your meetings on the newsletters, calendar of meetings. that
And
I-
they were there this time, so thank you.
And so that's like a basic, and whoever wants to communicate with me, whether it's you or Hank or whoever you all want to designate as sort of the person to do communications with me, just easier to talk to one person. But feel free to email me, call me. When I've worked with other committees, it's helpful to know in advance sort of what are the big topics for your agenda? Are there things that the public should be paying attention to right now? I've worked, as Natasha can attest, I've worked with the housing working group on things like surveys of the community on given topics. So I can certainly help with that. We have Polko, which does customized surveys. So we can certainly do that along the way.
So if we think we might be needing surveys in the next year, it's easier to build that.
Yeah, I
On
mean,
the
if you give me a
days.
week or two of notice,
Okay,
it's, yeah, they're pretty easy to build.
We don't need 6 months.
No, that would be great for them.
Do we need to budget for any of that? by the way?
No, that's all, we have it as a service.
What's the name of that?
Polko, Polco. The town subscribes to the service, and then we can use it for all our reports and meetings.
And Cindy, I agree with everything Cindy's saying. This is Natasha. The only thing is that when you do surveys, it's really hard to get a full breadth of demographics. And, you know, but most people in general that have been responding to the surveys for the housing, and it'll be different for climate action and for all of our, tend to be a specific demographic that has time to do the survey. And so I feel like it's a good way of doing it. We have to figure out how to reach out to different groups of different age groups and different demographics. But I think the community outreach is even more important. And the community meetings have been more diverse than the survey. And I don't know, Cindy, maybe you have, this happens everywhere. I mean, everywhere we've done surveys for our other, municipalities or institutions, there's always a small demographic that actually responds. So just understanding how to get the word out is difficult, but we have to figure out how to do it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I don't think it's an either or. I think it's one tool in the toolbox we have for doing outreach. In addition, we have our newsletter. We can create feedback forms. Social media is certainly one other tool. So there are a lot of different ways that we can engage the community. If you all are doing any kind of community hearing or a meeting that you want people to attend, I can certainly drive people to those as well. So I think it's really just a matter of figuring out who from this committee wants to be sort of the point person on communications, and then going.
And one other question about what's appropriate to go through the channels and what channels you have.
Yeah.
So in our greenhouse gas inventory that we've looked at, 97% of the greenhouse gases are outside of the town's direct, impact. So it's going to be a lot of moving hearts and minds. And the state has a lot of programs, and there's federal programs as well, but things like Mass Save and the Drive Green and these other things, heat pump incentives to go electric on your lawnmowers. Are there ways that we could promote those programs through town channels? And what are the appropriate, good tax bills be used for?
Water bills.
Those types of things. Water bills. Okay.
Yeah, when Eversource was doing a big push for older homes getting the Mass Save a couple of years ago, right before the pandemic, we partnered with them and we said we were a partner in their communication, so it was helpful to me. But I would say that every single thing you're doing that you think is going to be implemented should be communicated early and widely. I mean, I heard today people complaining that they didn't know the US Open was going to happen. And I bet you if you ask the select board in Brookline, they would be pulling their hair out, right? They're like, they just showed up at this time. So if we're going to talk to people about switching their energy provider, we should be talking to them the minute we think it might happen, and then this is the next step. So just, I think it's going to affect people because they will come up and like, the first I heard of it.
Yeah, on any project like that where there are lots of milestones along the way, we can't communicate enough.
So I would assume that we would want to wait until the select board officially adopts it, though. Like, we don't want to get ahead of you guys on that.
Right,
Right.
but then it will be time.
Yeah.
But then it will be time.
Yeah.
The
Especially if
minute
it's so short.
you say yes.
The minute we say yes, then it will be time.
All right.
Well, and so having a campaign kind of all set and ready, packaged, ready to go, and you just put it up.
But I do think getting this committee page up
Yeah.
would be helpful, because there are people who have said to me,
There does look like there is
where's the
something set
climate
up.
committee? And getting it listed maybe in the list of communities and that kind of thing. covering
Yeah,
both
it's under the
It's under
committees. Well, we
committees.
can build it out, so it's a really useful tool, like the housing working groups page has all the stuff.
And then I assume we can also link to other things like the solar, the RTS solar production or outside. Can you
Yeah, we
link
can
that?
link
So you can
outside.
We
add-
can link to the public utility and we can link to anything on government, sometimes private.
Okay. Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Is anybody chomping at the bit to be in the connection?
I'd love to hear from all
It'd be great if we could
I was
find one
gonna
person.
nominate Rachel. I'm gonna ask her to think about it.
I do have a question though. So thinking about all those different channels, where are you seeing other committees really getting the most engagement?
I think the number one tool that we have as a communications tool in the town right now is the newsletter.
And how many people are subscribed to it? Just so-
Thousands.
Wow.
3,600.
Okay.
And growing pretty
That's a
rapidly.
great
That's
start.
great.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody gets their information from all sorts of sources, which is why I think we need to cover all of our bases, but I think that's probably the number one tool that we have right now.
And our ask is if you don't get it, you sign up, and if you do have it, we'll just send it to you. We ask everyone.
It's steadily growing that way.
We're trying to get a quarter of the adult population.
And then retweet and share.
Yeah, all that stuff. Yep. One other thought, and we did this with the housing working group. We have what's called news flashes or notify me's. You can sign up as a resident for any topics that you're particularly interested in. I would recommend creating a notify me specifically for this committee, so that people are getting not just agendas and minutes, but to the extent that there are other communications that you want to push out. It's just another way to target people who are specifically interested in this topic.
So as we build our outreach efforts, we'll have that already set up as a channel.
Yeah, and I can do that again, Cecilia. That's on the website.
While we're on the subject of websites, I think that one of the recurring themes that we saw in some of the climate action plans were dashboards that help residents, keep track of how the town is doing over time. And that seems to be something that might also get wrapped up in the consultant idea.
Certainly for the community energy aggregation, but some of the other communities are pulling in a lot of different resources. and
Like more than just the CPA.
Yeah.
So we should be thinking in terms of,
Maybe in your RFP for your consultant who's gonna write your plan, maybe get some recommendations on
dashboards.
how to do dashboards,
Because
because,
we
yeah,
tie into green communities.
yes, people
For
are,
example.
is Green Communities Progress one of your goals?
Yes,
Yes.
well, it may,
Somebody put it on the select board goal, so I'm thinking maybe it came through.
wasn't one of our goals, but I'm thinking it was one of the things that we actually rated in the potential actions, was deepening our relationship with green communities. We haven't voted on it.
Yeah, it would be great if we could tie this to Meter Williams, things. to
The slideshow. Certainly.
Yeah, this is definitely an area that I'm interested in, and like in engaging the community. I think it's a really important part of what we're gonna need to do. So I'd be happy to help if others want to volunteer, they
that
can
would
join
be-
me, but.
We look for everybody's individual expertise, which is, sounds like that's your sweet spot too.
We need to vote on that, or is that just like something that's probably good?
It's just a volunteer.
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 Yes. Volunteer person.
Perfect.
Sure.
I'll make sure you have my contact.
Yes.
I know you have a hard stop, so unless there's any last questions or comments.
Happy to come back.
For joining us.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
It's always good to have a committee behind you. Very much appreciated. Very well, I see you over there.
Yes, but I won't be perfectly on time.
All right, so I think we were going to go to the charge real quick. Hank. Is that right? So at our last meeting, I think Natasha had commented that there was a lot of learning in another committee that she's in, I think it's the Affordable Housing Working Group, going through a mission statement exercise. We offline communicated, and then Marianne helpfully recommended that we look at the charge again, because in fact, it probably is our mission statement. And so we thought we'd just look at it one more time and see if there's anything that is missing here. But as I read it again, it felt very directive.
Go right on the list.
Put it right up there, right? It's already on our website.
Is that?
We could put it on our second website if we need to.
So is the charge the goals?
The charge has a list of deliverables, what's in scope, and essentially a mission statement is.
It's the 7 items, right? So this is the mission statement basically, or the goals of the committee, right?
Right.
Yes.
Okay, so that's, okay.
Microsoft, thank you for all of the hoops.
Oops, let's see. Share screen.
So we can maybe just read through this again and feel, and if anybody has a question, or if they feel like we should amend or request the select board to edit this. This would be a good time to do that.
We're already working on number 1.
One question, do we have a library or documentation on vulnerability assessments and hazard mitigation plans?
There is.
So the town actually has just created a new hazard vulnerability analysis, literally that I saw come into my email today, but I have not read yet.
Okay, so
Um,
that's underway.
So there has been work that's been underway by the Emergency Planning Committee.
And was there some output from the MVP grant a couple of years ago that also would?
I suspect it would have informed the HVA.
Yeah.
So I don't remember specifically what came from that, but I know they gathered up what we had in developing a new HVA.
So
So any
What-
questions down to, I'm sorry. go ahead.
once that's approved by the select board or whatever you do,
Yeah, I don't think that comes to the select board for approval. I think it just becomes the working document of the planning committee of the LAPC. But we should be able to get it now. People
Yeah.
can take a look and see what the climate pieces are that are in that.
So the greenhouse gas inventory, it's already been started, but only for municipal components, and we will seek additional funding to expand on that to the full townwide. And the long-term climate action goals.
We
So
started
that's,
that,
you started that
but that's going to be the body of the actual plan.
Right.
report. I think what you, later on in this meeting, you're looking at examples from Wellesley
Right.
and perhaps using their outline. Even though they have a different governmental structure,
Right.
it's a valuable starting point. So we're working on that as well. Target dates, benchmarks, well, that will come out of the committee plan.
Right.
For benchmarks. But we do know that at the very least, we want to have a 2030, a 2040, and a 2050.
Right.
Target.
Focusing on the next decade, especially in the
Yes.
greater detail.
Cross-sector effort. I guess that would be both public, private.
Yeah, and I think a big piece of that is going to be the public.
Yes.
You know, and we're going to make, well, the CEA would be a big chunk right out the gate. So
Well, and I think working with like the building department for any construction, any projects that are going on, that'll be a cross-functional piece of work as well.
Right.
And as we identify the activities in 3, I think we just have to revisit this and say, you know, who are the stakeholders and who do we need to engage and kind of plan for that in each one of the activities. And it's looked like how most of the plans are, right? There's kind of the activity, who needs to be, who's leading it, who's involved, who do we need to engage with, so.
And with the business community, there is a business liaison. What is it called?
To the chamber.
the chamber.
To the, yeah.
Yeah.
That might be a very good group to do presentations to, or to reach out to, or get a representative.
Right.
Yeah.
For.
And then Eversource also has a streets program targeting small business in particular. So I think that's one of the things we'll be really trying to build some bridges with, you know, hopefully one or more humans at Eversource.
But to your point, do we need to think about having other advisors attend and meet with us?
So we are, and later in this meeting, we're going to talk a little bit about the possibility of working groups, and that
Okay.
might bring more stakeholders into our process.
And to the select board programs and policies to implement this, including reduction, source, and generation of energy. See, so that's certainly going to be part of the plan. And the municipal component, I think, is perhaps best. Well, some of these things are the private sector. Schools and municipal are part of the public sector. Transportation systems is both public and private. Land use, I think that would be coming also back to to planning board in terms of requirements. And then water and sewer. Should note that Andy's first assignment has to been start to look at how we can make the Charles River Pump Station push toward a net zero facility.
That's a huge source of energy use in the town, right?
It's the second largest building user of electricity.
Behind the
Second,
high school.
high school. So that's why it's a point of focus, but also if there could be renewable energy on site, then I think it also heads toward the resiliency component of that location and the importance of water. Obviously, it's an important municipal service. Waste management, I know there are other studies and processes going on with within the DPW and within the RTS, so we would be liaising with them. Infrastructure that would involve, I guess, some things already is on with the permeable surfaces within the town and the opportunities and all of the NIPD's activities that are going on in terms of cleaning up runoff.
Right.
Space, agriculture, and forestry, well, that ties into parks and forestry within the town.
We also, I think one of our goals last week was looking into how to support carbon sequestration within the town limits.
And that's another, Andy, your knowledge in terms of conservation biology. You have some clue as to how to put the algorithm together.
Yeah.
We're counting on it. We're counting on the next generation. Climate action plan we're working on, I think, as we develop it. We just need to make sure we're touching all of these bases. Some of you might have helped draft this. I can't recall.
I think it might have just been
It
me.
was just
Just you.
you.
We have you to credit.
It's not my fault. Yeah.
Credit or blame?
Credit or blame. And so I guess in terms of funding opportunities, there is also this question as to whether we want to earmark some of the monies that are generated from the RTS solar, which currently go into what an energy bucket, but whether some of those, so for instance, when we first were going through that RFQ process, there was an estimate that Beth Greenblatt put together that estimated that between the three sources, net metering, lease, and pilot, there'd be a generation of about $500,000 a year. For the last 6 years, that number is about $750,000. So even if we said, well, let's just look at the monies that are above and beyond what was originally estimated, could those be targeted directly to, it might help in terms of the selling of a warrant article.
Is that a CAPC role, though? Our role is more to say, gee, here's a grant for X, or is it to say, we're not making recommendations as to how the town should reallocate a funding stream like the RTS, are we?
I read that more as, are there external grant
Right.
opportunities that we could help bring in? I think
That's
Mhm.
certainly wouldn't-
Well, and sometimes
I
the,
think both are true. I'm
Both
just
are
gonna
true.
say.
and sometimes grant funding wants to look to see what the town is doing and maybe match the grants.
so you've got to get in the game, so to speak.
Yeah. And I think I've seen some set up that way.
That's good to know.
Did you say that the RTS underestimated out of it? Do you initially say
We were conservative in the estimate as to what the total net benefits would be. Yeah,
Right.
I mean, and purposely conservative, but town meeting approved it. So there is a differential between. So it was good to be on the positive side.
On the reports, I see that we're supposed to report semi-annually to the select board on a number of items. We feel like we're still kind of just getting rolling here. Marianne, do you have a thought on when the appropriate time would be to come back to the select board, or is there an expectation this fall before or after select town meeting?
So I would have said, I would give you a pass for the moment, but the select board will take a look at goals again, probably in December or early January. So it would be good to have a report before that.
Okay.
Would it be helpful before town meeting to have something, even if it's rudimentary, just since we're coming with this warrant to say
That request, yeah, it might, that could be good.
October
thing,
1st, that
right.
we'll have it.
Well, August 1st. August 1st, we would need.
No, August 1st is the goals, but before town meeting, I think that if one of the pieces that goes to town meeting along with the request for a CEA is just sort of an update from the planning committee about what the work is that's been undertaken so far and what the plans are for the next 6 months, I think that might be helpful to
And
town
that'll
meeting.
be right about it, our 6 months after our first meeting.
Yeah,
Right, excuse me, wouldn't that also be part of the rollout of the article, the warrant articles that you were? That'd be one of the meetings, right?
so it depends, it could be, I mean, it depends on what we end up deciding is ready to go in October, Kevin. You know, are we ready to make a request that's related to a consultant for writing the plan? You know, how many things are coming at that time? So to give it context.
Right.
Is really the question.
Okay.
Just thinking in terms of how few meetings we have between now and then, we probably should discuss whether or not a small, maybe working group of here could start to work out a budget ask. And maybe doing some investigation of some other towns on what they've paid for consultants. You know, how they pace those payments. You know, is it all in 1 year? Is it over the course of more? Is anybody interested in working on that?
Should we go back to the groups that we originally investigated to get that information? Not every group had a consultant.
Right.
Some did, some didn't. There's not that many,
Yeah,
you know, it's only like 3 or
right.
something. It's, you know, I'm happy to go back. I don't want to, well, so
Yeah, yeah.
you want the nuts and bolts.
Just how much they spent, what they got out of it.
Right. Sure.
That would be helpful.
I think Concord even had the RFP out there.
We have done, we did a
It was
little bit of,
public, it was on their
Yeah,
website.
right.
And they, whether they used some of the people, but also MAPC, but also there's a state contract that has been competitively bid. So I believe
Is that through Power
PR, no, but like you go PR, it used to be PRF 62, it's PRF 74. But you're,
May I ask a question?
yes.
Okay, sorry, guys. I've been dozing in and off. Sorry about that. So in October, so again, my forgiveness, because I've literally been dozing on and off. So in October, sorry, so the question is, is the question in October, do we ask for a warrant article that's asking for a consultant? Is that what the question is? So, or is there any question that we're going to be ready by October to ask for a consultant? Forgive me for not hearing everything.
So Artie, I think what we're gonna do is investigate what other towns have done, both in terms of timing for hiring consultants, how much they spent on those consultants and what those consultants did. So, you know, we know that we probably need to do a greenhouse gas inventory. So there's some work there. There's the writing of a plan is another body of work. And I think our question is, what is the range that we need to look at in terms of funding? And then that could help inform an ask for the fall warrant.
Which would be an ask. We'd be stipulating an approximate amount that would allow us to go out to an RFP or
With a-
RFQ.
Yeah, with enough detail in it that we could say this is what they're going to be for us and this is how much it's going to cost.
Okay,
Our need for consultant to create the plan is different from some of the original requests for consultants because they were all starting from, we're not sure how to do this yet. So there was this first wave that created them. We now have a whole bunch of templates and are able to say, we like that, we like that, we like that. So it'd be a different level of work. than-
Right.
Yes.
thanks, guys. Thank you, Mike, and my apologies. Thank you.
Can I also
Natasha,
ask a
hand up.
question? Yeah, thanks. So I think this is great, and I had it, I was reading through it. And I see that it was done in September of 2021. But it looks to me that those are more actionable items, which is really great because we rarely get to actionable items when we have these committees so quickly, which is really exciting. But what I was saying before, and I don't know if I can share my screen, is before there should be something like more broad is what I'm thinking, but I don't know if everyone else feels the same way and I'm going to share 3 other plans. I don't know, can you see my screen?
Yes.
So this is Somerville. So having goals that are overarching, like building and energy, mobility, environment, community, leadership, and just saying these are kind of the goals within these 5 I guess whatever they are.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but you know what I'm talking about, categories, let's say. So this is Somerville, this is Wellesley. So they have pathways. So to pursue targeted action on climate change, Wellesley is focusing on 6 pathways: governance, energy, buildings, mobility, again, very similar, natural resources and waste. And then they have guiding principles. The framework used to assess and prioritize actions incorporates 7 guiding principles to ensure Wellesley's climate action aligns with the town's values. There's greenhouse gas reduction, resilience, natural resource protection, regional collaboration, economic vitality, equity and justice, and public health. So it's just more broad. And then the third one is Newton, that says they have, these items, and it's long-term success is carbon neutral Newton by 2050. That is our goal. And there's 6 areas of action: implementing Newton's climate action plan, promoting clean and renewable energy, greening Newton's transportation and streetscapes, improving new construction and major renovations, improving existing buildings, and then reducing emissions associated with consumption and disposal. So all of these plans have this kind of goal or mission, and then they go into the plan that then starts going through all of the different actionable items under these categories. I don't know if that's something that we want to do or not. It just struck me that all of them, it was very clear what the principles were and what kind of, the goals were, overarching, and then going to it, and they were all different. So I just wanted to kind of share that to see if that's something that we would like to do, or is the document that we have, which has a charge, which is more action related, is that the way we want to approach it? I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there because when I reviewed the other ones, it just struck me that there are different ways of doing it.
So I'm gonna say, I don't think the charge defines the plan. It defines some of what we need to get out of the plan, right? So I think it's up to this group to decide ultimately how they want to organize. The purpose of the charge was for the select board to say, you know what, we know we need to know these things to go forward, so.
Right.
But
Yeah, good.
it would seem that having those categories, pathways would be a good organizing step, as if we look at having the start of a coherent presentation to town meeting to say, well, what have we done in our first 6 months? That's a good deliverable that can shape everything we do going forward.
I kind of like that we started actually further down and we said, and I know we're going to be part of this discussion today, is we looked at the specific actions that because some of what I read once I actually got further down, we thought, I don't know, are they really going to get that done in the next few years, right? But maybe we just start a step further and then we work back, maybe, Natasha, into that kind of structure. We say, like, we really like these 10 things now, and then we can organize that to sort of put some structure. Well, these 3 really are about transportation. This is about, you know, these are different levers we think we're gonna pull. I like those plans. I think they're really lengthy. I think they spent, the consultant almost had to prove themselves in writing them, that they had to be, you know, 50 pages, and that's why they had to have the pillars. I think it's clear in terms of communication, so I think there's a pro there, but I guess I would say maybe what we do is really start with the action and then kind of come back to the, you know, how does this look? But either way makes a lot of sense.
Well, I think your point is well taken, because you're going for simple, practical action. So what they call aspirational, and even like the town consultant for Arlington said that a lot of the stuff they put down there, she kept using the word, this one's visionary, this one's visionary. And so they put a lot of stuff down, and then you kind of water your goals down and can't focus on the things that you might actually be able to accomplish. And so I like the compact approach that is done here, and then maybe categorizing them, but not like create this monstrosity of a document that, you know, it looks great on paper and it looks like you're going to conquer the world, but in reality, it's.
We may actually be a lot closer to what Natasha is actually suggesting already. And the reason is that the actions that we took when we rated were already categorized in these major pathways. And the major pathways are the ones that if you look through the MAPC toolkit, like this is what every town is using. They're all going through the built environment. They're all going through mobility. They're all going through the energy supply, natural resources, governance, et cetera. So I think we're going to wind up with a document that actually has very similar introductory page and very similar structure, because we're building not from scratch. We're building from so many other plans today. But I do, you know, one thing I really did like was being very specific and saying our goal is net zero by 2050. I don't know if the chart says that, but it implies it.
Yeah.
You know, it would be good for us to state that clearly our goal is net zero as a town and across town, all sectors by 2050.
I agree with everything that you guys are saying. I do think that the communication to the town and for them to understand and have a buy-in has to have clarity. And I feel like this charge document is awesome, but it's a lot of words. And I feel like it needs to we need to have something that is easy to understand for people that are not in the weeds of this and don't know about it. And really, we want to have them engaged to understand holistically what the goal is. And this is coming from, we spent a year talking about green communities, and it went nowhere because we were had so much information that was so overwhelming to everyone. So anything that creates clarity in a very concise way and then has more information, I think is helpful for, you know, the community to buy in.
Thank you. That's probably a good segue then for our next topic, because, there's a couple hands up still. Joe and Keith. Joe, why don't you go? You haven't talked yet.
Sure. No, I agree, you know, with what everyone is saying. You know, I think we get back into these all at a future date. You know, I mean, if you were to go in front of the community, you would say, look, Needham is not unique compared to any other, you know, action plan that any town has written out there and paid a consultant $100,000 for. Like, it's the same buckets, it's the same things. I think we would come back and say, you know, here's some real action items that we could prioritize. And here are the things we want to go after as Needham. Like, here's where Needham is unique, and pick the one or two that, you know, we as a group want to really advance as quickly as we can with the tools that we have, these things. And maybe our focus is more over here in those sort of decades that Hank talked about. You know, here's the first 10 years, the next 10 years. You know, I think that would be helpful for people. But I just don't see value of paying a consultant, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars to just write another report that you just put Needham's name on versus Newton or Acton, or because it's all the same kind of categories. But we get back into that at some point down the line.
Right. Yeah, I definitely, I'm with you on that. Keith. Kevin. Oh, sorry, Kevin. From now on, you're going to be Keith.
Hey, no, I see some value in what Natasha's saying. I get it that I think a lot of the towns are using the same verbiage, but it's a tool. And if if we need to get in front of the public and start to make our case, it's a tool to do it with. And we could give it, I don't think we need a consultant. I think we could lift a law of the text perhaps, but we give it to Cindy and we put on the website. But as soon as we start doing this, we gotta be ready to go. And this just might be a tool that gives people a framework to understand what we're doing. I don't think it's, it shouldn't be a huge lift, but it should help us.
And I don't think we should hire a consultant. I wasn't saying we need to do a whole report. All I was saying was we need to come up with something concise that can communicate better what the goals of this group is with those action items and this charge to set up the charge, because I think the charge is really strong. I just think that communication wise, we might be missing one or two things because we're not looking at it more globally.
Also, maybe we need to present to the community how all these things tie into climate action. What does stormwater have to do with climate? Because isn't climate just all you energy people or something, to really communicate that this involves everyone and not just the greenies, basically.
All right, we're gonna segue, because you guys have all been, I'm getting really excited listening to everybody because I feel like this next topic is going to be very well, hopefully, received. So we're going to talk a little bit about, I had a conversation with Mary Beth Martello in Wellesley. So she's a sustainability coordinator in Wellesley, and they just wrapped up their climate action plan. And I know that a lot of you have read it. Very well developed document. So she walked me through her process to get there. And before I get into process, I just want to acknowledge that Wellesley is very different in some ways from Needham. So they don't have a town manager. So they're very dispersed in terms of decision making. They have a municipal light plan. They have an established climate action committee that has been around for several years. They have a sustainability coordinator. But otherwise, they're similar sized town than us, and they do have colleges and universities that we don't have. But they did go through a process that I thought, there might be a lot of parallels that we could draw upon. So before we go through the deck, I just want to high level. So one of the things that Mary Beth mentioned was that her intention when she started the process was to not start from scratch. It wasn't whiteboarding with stakeholders. So she understood that she needed to do some stakeholder engagement, and she needed to bring different constituencies along, both within the town structure and outside of the town structure. But she did start with a document, a very simple document that was basically a Word document outline of what she thought the climate action plan might look like when it's finished. And as you'd expect, it had a lot of these categories. It had the transportation, it had the built environment, it had natural resources, governance, et cetera. And she used that as a tool to engage. And then she put together a very brief slideshow that went along with it as well. And so her process was to start with those very simple documents and the structure, and then start to bring along the different department heads, as well as the different committees in town whose buy-in that she felt she needed in order to advance it. When I say she was the spokesperson for the Climate Action Committee. So the Climate Action Committee was helping develop these documents as well. But she began that process, writing the document in fall of 2020. She began meeting with department heads and different committee boards in the first part of 2021. They were very brief presentations, 10-minute presentations, along with an opportunity for some Q&A to ask for feedback, potentially to ask for nominations for people who might become involved in the process more deeply as it moved along. And then in late spring, they took that feedback, they fleshed out the plan a little bit more, they put together working groups. And the working groups were organized around the main categories that you see in the document. So that she had a working group focused on transportation, on buildings, natural resources, on electric energy supply, et cetera. And she asked the boards for a representative to join those, but she had someone from the Climate Action Plan Committee chairing each of those working groups. And so each of those working groups started with the draft that she had, the first draft of the Climate Action Plan. And they went off and they had a 2-month window to flesh out that area and then bring back their recommendations, which would then go into the first draft of the Climate Action Plan. They did have a consultant helping them with that as well. And that's approximately when she started doing a lot more of the external stakeholder. So public hearings, webinars, surveys and the like. So she was doing that as the working groups were starting to funnel their output to her. In the fall, they then created a more final draft of the plan. They began town meeting outreach. They again reached back to all of the boards, back to the town departments, make sure that there were no major flags with the draft. They had a final draft that went to the town meeting in fall of 2021. And so the other thing that I just want to point out is that they still see it as a work in progress. So the document was what was delivered, but there are still implementation blueprints that they have to work on along the way for each of the projects that they're going through. So that's the very high level of the process. What I wanted to show you as well, just a few of the documents that she had created. So this was the presentation that was used with the boards and committees. So very simple, showing where their energy greenhouse gas emissions came from. Identifying what the progress is. So this is always helpful, what they've done so far. And then looking at the baseline in 27, what the 2020 goal is, and then how do they get to net zero in 2050? So sort of setting the context here. And you can see they have their interim targets. A very high level of detail at this point, because this is really early in the process. And this was where they started to get into some of the principles. And then what the tracks were for the engagement. So the working groups and consultant, the municipal engagement, and then the community engagement. And then this was those 6 buckets of actions, right? The energy, the waste, buildings, natural resources, governance, and mobility. And you can see that she had working groups organized for each one of these. So the task was to prioritize and time climate actions with the consultant report, integrate community feedback into that process. And so if you've seen the plan, you know that she talks about the relative impact as well as the relative effort for each of the actions. And then she goes through each of those in a little bit greater detail. This was, again, early on, so this is pre-working groups. So she's just talking about some of the ideas, and she probably did the same thing that we just did, which is to go through other plans and crib some of the actions that she knows are going to be important. All buildings, municipal buildings, the mobility piece, electrifying vehicles, installing EV charging stations. You all saw this in the activity we just went through. Reducing waste, natural resources, and then the governance piece as well. I don't think there's much after this slide. But the timeline, so this was the timeline I went through. And then she turned it into a question. So it was a good, effective way, she said, to engage across all of the Wellesley sectors early on to make sure that nobody was surprised or nobody felt like they were left out of the process. Again, our structure is a little bit different, but it would be probably worthwhile talking about whether or not we think we should be putting together a project plan, and if it would differ significantly from the one that Wellesley used, and then potentially socializing that project plan across different departments and boards. I'll stop there and see if anybody had any questions about.
Was the consultant involved from the start of that
She was,
presentation?
yeah.
So there was someone sort of guiding and making these nice slides from the beginning.
I didn't ask her who made the slides.
I don't mean
but
the
it's-
slides, but
Oh, the content, yeah, yeah,
she's composing and gathering the content and making it, like someone shepherding the whole process. From
so my understanding is the consultant really came on board more during the working groups
Oh.
than up front. So she sat down and wrote the first draft of the plan. And that was what became the bones of that slide deck. You can see it's not a lot of narrative. And the content, it's very familiar from any plan that I've looked at.
So Wellesley created the position before they took the first step. They created a staff person.
Yes, so Mary Beth has been on staff for a few years there. So prior to the climate action plan.
Yeah.
So,
I think that was a great plan. I mean, I think that was very clear. They had the goals, they had, to me, that was a really good presentation to get stakeholders involved. And I thought it was really successful. If that's something that we could use as a model and kind of implement all of the pieces that we've already worked on and start working on that, I think that would be a really effective way to communicate to all.
And now we do have MAPC, and part of what they're supposed to be doing is helping this committee create a climate action plan. And part of their remit currently is to reach out to the department heads, and we need to set that up. So, and that's already funded through Green Communities, whoever, DOER, DPU or somebody. So I think that if this committee says this is the direction we want to go in, perhaps they can assist us. They may even have package slides that we can. We haven't had that next round of discussion yet with them, but we do need to do that. It's not as though you don't have anything else. Year end FY 23.
A month.
Yeah.
Gets better in a month.
Yeah.
so before we maybe dive deep into like the how, I guess my questions would be to this group, that general project plan that she had, and starting with a draft, socializing it, moving into a working group phase where she broke the work streams into several and had this is one piece I did. Can we bring up the spreadsheet for a second?
I was gonna say, and I think she had her greenhouse gas inventory already before she started.
She did,
any of this
and
too,
she's
so that was the
done it
baseline, so-
herself, so she's
They had more than
fairly
one.
This is what you heard.
They had several. didn't
greenhouse gas. They do it every year. Yeah. I asked her some of the questions that we talked about sustainability coordinators letter. So what sort of skill sets are important? She's like, you need to be able to do a greenhouse gas inventory.
Is this what you were?
Yeah, this is the spreadsheet. Could you zoom that in just a little bit? So one of the things that they did is when they moved to the working group phase, they brainstormed as a committee who they wanted in the working groups. And so they looked at maybe down right, bottom right, there's a little percentage there.
Higher. Nope, you were in the right place.
There you go. Oh,
Yeah, well,
you might need to
like that.
drag it. That's good. That's good. So you can see they had, they were looking in different departments, organizations, traffic, police, schools, DPWs in there. You can see youth group, Sustainable Wellesley, select board. So they went through each of the work streams and identified who their ideal people were to be added to it. So they didn't put out a call. They sent out invites. And some of these names were actual, during the early engagements, they were either people who volunteered or boards or committees were nominating people. And so once they had the people accepted into the working groups, they set up a summit. And this is where the consultant really helped go through the process of identifying and vetting what the actions were and what the output should be at the end of the process. And they did time box it, so it was 2 months, which according to Mary Beth, some of the committees felt like they needed more time, but the consultant was actually insistent on time boxing it so it wouldn't just drag on. And it was one of those law of diminishing returns would kick in if you went 3-4 months on that process. Just holding feet to the fire. And so they did that. They did the two months.
What did the output look like? Did
So
you
each
get
of those then came back with a list of actions,
Okay.
along with the timing, the level of effort required to do it, and its potential impact in sort of like relative terms, not absolute terms. And that's one of the things the consultant really helped with. And that became the basis for the actual plan that was written.
So the consultant was really more, at least in this phase, a facilitator and guider rather than writing the plan.
I'm not sure if it was Mary Beth or the consultant who actually drafted all of the verbiage. And I could go back and ask her how much it was her words versus the consultant's words.
Or maybe just also aggregator, right? I mean,
Yeah, she
maybe-
took those outputs and there was one or both of them putting in the narrative
Yeah.
and the pretty charts and everything, doing the design
But
work.
the
and all.
process was through the working groups. It sounds like the consultant at least got them rolling in terms of process.
The consultant did a lot of work with them on the process.
So it's the consultant basically going to the working groups, several rooms. and like helping them.
That's a good question. She didn't join the subgroup meetings. So she joined unless you're invited, but there's too many of them. So what happened was, they had to be very careful not to create a quorum in any of the working groups because of where the people were coming from, right? So if there was no quorums, they weren't subject to public meetings. And therefore they could meet as frequently as they needed, as well as online and via phone. And so a lot of the work happened in that manner, like where they might be meeting weekly, they might be doing webinars weekly. And so wouldn't have been possible for a consultant to keep up with that level of meetings. So they did the kickoff at the beginning, and the kickoff was really designed to make sure that everybody knew what they were expected to do and how they would produce the outputs at the end of it.
Maybe the consultant was really in touch with the people who were running each working group.
Yes. So because there is still a climate action plan committee member in each of those groups, they could funnel questions back to the Mary Beth or the consultant when they were working.
I was gonna say it's the asterisk person there.
Up
Just
top.
as you're looking at that chart, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have that
Okay.
the other competing event.
Great. Thanks, Mary Ann.
Thank you.
So we just did something similar with the housing group. So there is someone that is hired to do, to put it all together and to create the master plan. But we have committee members and we have 3 different groups. And each subgroup met for 2 months. We did have to do it. It didn't matter how many people, once you had more than 2 people, you needed to actually create a meeting, and we did it by Zoom, and it was put onto the town's calendar. And then we just met last week to everybody to tell their findings so that the person who is in charge of the master plan, the person that was hired, could start putting all of this together to create a master plan so that then we can look at it independently and give feedback. So it's very similar to this, where we created the subgroups. We just created 3 because that's what we determined for our groups, but very similar to what you're showing.
Okay, good. Thoughts? Does this feel like a direction we should try to head?
I think it's the only way we'll be able to wrestle this beast.
Yeah.
It's felt
I
like we
agree.
were struggling to find a framework to use. And when I saw this, it just felt like it would be a nice pathway.
Yeah, and I think based on what I've heard from this group so far, not spending a lot of time on whiteboarding is probably gets us moving faster, right? I mean, and we're not the first ones to do this, so it's pretty well known what are the few things we can do, right, in the near term. And not spending a lot of time and spinning here and
Right.
just kind of moving forward with, I think maybe when we hear what bubbled up as priorities, maybe that becomes the working groups versus kind of these broad mobility topics. Maybe we think about working groups kind of really focused on one or two activities versus anything you can do or anything and everything you could do around mobility. But I agree. I think what she outlined makes lots of sense for us.
Or you, since you did all of that analysis as to the feedback on each of the subgroups, a lot of that is already giving us our preliminary priorities. It's not as though we want to ignore the things that are way out there, but we know that we don't have a lot of detail on it.
Right.
Sometime in the future.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Mary Beth did state, and I want to underscore this as well, the plan is meant to be a framework for all stakeholders. Keep it at a high enough level that you can make sure that you're speaking to everybody. She made the difference between the plan and the implementation blueprints. So, like, to your point, the plan doesn't need to have that much detail on how to get it done. That's still going to have to be solved by either, the departments that are really responsible for implementing it when they go through their annual budgets and their annual project planning. Or if we're talking about something outside of the municipal, it's the sustainability coordinators outreach campaign or something else. So she did make a distinction that it should be kept at a high enough level that it's comprehensive with enough detail for prioritization without getting into the how it gets done and how exactly how much it should cost and how much time it should take.
I
So
completely agree.
yeah. So if there's no objections, what I was going to recommend. Oh, I'm sorry, Keith, Kevin. You're never gonna let me let that one down, are you?
I know, man, don't worry. Just a few, I love the idea of the working groups. I see the need. I think it's good, it's flexible. A few things hit my ear a little strangely, hearing how Wellesley did it. Doing by invitation only, that's a different dynamic. And I could see a lot of people in Needham being put off by that. I'm against any plan I'm not part of, sort of to quote Harry Truman. And I think it would create sort of, I think it'd bring out a lot of contrarian attitudes out of people. I don't know what Zoom's going to be like after July, but I don't think we can do anything or make these groups as workarounds against or to avoid open meeting laws. So just that's my only things. That's what I was hearing. So I want to make sure we're not treading there.
Yeah, so those are both good points. I can find out more about why Mary Beth felt that these working groups were not subject to open meeting laws. And obviously we probably have to consult internally here as well, right?
You might want to ask Lee Newman because we just did it for the housing group and we were not allowed to have it. We had to have open meetings.
Okay, so maybe that's not an option. I don't think that's why necessarily they did it. But they did try to make the cadence of meetings frequent so that it moved through more rapidly. The invite only, the only other thing that I can say about that is that it was not meant to be exclusive of the rest of the town. So she was holding public webinars and forums and feedback places where the greater township could bring forth questions, feedback, concerns. So that was happening on the parallel track. But what they wanted to avoid was sending out, a call and not getting the representation that they need. And they needed people from the stakeholder groups that were going to be tasked with implementation or whose buy-in would be critical. So for example, in the business community, getting somebody from the Chamber of Commerce or getting somebody from Babson College or Wellesley College. They wanted to make
precisely.
sure. Yeah, that's why they were invites. But you see that there are actual.
But there are there are optics to.
Artie, you've had your hand up.
Yes, and then thank you. Yeah, thank you, Keith, because this is actually exactly, well, 99% what I was going to comment on. It's very important that at least the public see what's going on, and exactly, when they come into play is fairly important. How much they're actually able to specifically engage in the meeting at that time, or simply listen to the meeting at the time. The ability to at least listen to a meeting going on, I think is important. How much they're actually able to participate, I suppose. I'm not sure what the open meeting aspect falls into place as far as that goes. As far as like if some other people in different committees are listening to it, if they then when it can be considered a quorum, if they have the ability to participate, I'm not sure. But I think it's clear that we're open to the fact that the public needs to feel as though they're not being excluded, and somewhat the opposite, at least being relevant to what's going on, at least being able to hear what's going on. So they're not, the word surprise is not the correct word, but so we at least can say, here's everything going on. We've put out the information of what's coming up. Here, you can listen to what's going on, or wherever we chose to do it, or then after the fact, here's what's happening going on, and so we embrace the effect of what that creates.
Great.
That's all. Thank you.
So as far as next steps, I don't know, Rachel, you've already volunteered for something. Do you want to take back the conversation we had?
We'll see if anyone else. wants to go.
I'd asked Rachel if she'd be interested in helping with a project plan. So actually to flesh out the Needham version of this. But if anybody else would be interested in working on a project plan, we could take the bones of what we have here.
Okay.
And then build that forward. Oh, so I'm sorry. This is the what Hank has up right now is the.
Let me share. I'm sorry.
This was the first draft outline that Mary Beth had created, and what became the basis for the slide deck we just looked at a minute ago.
Well, we wanted, okay, this is
a 7-page.
This is a 7-page Word document that's just kind of going through what the climate action plan might have looked like before she wrote it. And if you look at the content, it's very similar to the slide deck.
When you write your term paper, you write your outline, get it approved by your professor, and then you go back and you take each section and fill it out.
I was thinking you wanted to spend more time on number 8, like really flesh that out.
Right.
Versus create an outline for the plan itself, but actually outline what the development might look like in a timeline.
Yeah, I do think that we probably need both, right?
Yeah.
So this document could be something we work on over the next month or so. But number 8, the plan development, is definitely an area where I think we could start to think through who are the stakeholders that we'd really want to bring along. If we had working groups, who might the representation of those working groups, where would that come from? High level timeline. What I find interesting about doing all of this is that it's June 13th today. Let's say we get a project plan in place for our July meeting, and then we start moving towards engagement with the boards in the early fall. We would potentially be moving into working groups right about town meeting. So the question, getting back to our ask, is do we think we'll need a consultant for any of that, or are we prepared to project manage it ourselves in the meantime? And we can't get a consultant before then, so it's, I think it's more of a question. Do we want to aspire to be hitting working groups by town meeting and focus our ask on what we think we might need afterwards?
Well, in this instance, they had a goal of hiring a consultant, right, to
Yep.
support the committee.
Right.
And I know Andy's great, but he can't do everything, and certainly doesn't have the expertise that an outside consultant would have.
Right.
If this were the only project I was working on, I would be able to spend a lot more time on it. And I think that certainly is true with Cecilia and also with Catherine. It's unfortunately, it's not the only thing we're working on. But one of your early recommendations could well be that all town projects should strive toward net zero, both renovations and so we're working in that direction, but the Permanent Public Building Committee doesn't yet have that directive from the town. So, that's just one piece of the larger equation, but certainly part of this in terms of the early actions would be making that kind of a recommendation.
So if I'm hearing you, one option would be to redirect towards something that we can achieve over the next couple of months while we wait for the funding to be able to do the broader working group piece.
Well, yes and no. I mean, even just taking this as a basis and then editing it could be a very good start.
Yeah.
And then giving that to the MAPC and ask them for any feedback they have. I mean, they may already have a draft, something like this in their back pocket.
They actually have a great toolkit
Yeah.
for climate action plans with detailed pathways, actions that can be taken. That is probably a good source if we don't have a consultant. Like if we didn't have a consultant and we got to the working group phase, I'm sure we could give those toolkits to each of the working groups and say, here's what MAPC recommends, what makes sense for me in this context.
And that might be the most affordable and most rapid way to get to where we want to get to.
Yeah.
Without having to reinvent the wheel.
It may be hard to get a consultant with personnel and resources in a timely fashion.
Yeah.
It could actually delay us moving forward.
Right.
But it does seem that a consultant, when we get to the point of engaging community members and stakeholders, since we don't have a sustainability director or somebody as a key point person, somebody who's been through this with other towns might say, well, yeah, this is how I found we reach out to the small business community, or this, and I think that's where the consultant could really add value, not in terms of writing the plan, but gathering people in and engagement, and it's a different level of communication, say, than what Cindy does in terms of and engaging and getting people on board.
Let me ask you a different way though. What if, so what I was laying out a minute ago in terms of timeline, which would get us into working groups around, October, November. Which means we'd probably have a draft plan in January. And then potentially be lining up to bring that to town meeting spring of next year. If we're not hiring a consultant to do any of the engagement up front, is it better for us to be thinking about a consultant in fall town meeting, or should we be thinking bigger? For example, should we be starting to look towards a sustainability coordinator position, someone who can take the plan that will be done in the first quarter of next year, theoretically, and start implementing.
Yeah, and that's where we're gonna need the most help.
I think that I had that question,
Yeah.
discussion with Kate,
Yes.
and FinCom will be extremely resistant
Yeah.
to hiring any new people. Finance Committee. And she felt that we had a much better opportunity or chance of success if we were looking to do a consultancy first.
Like to build
Yeah.
towards.
And then the sustainability coordinator could be somebody who maintains and updates that plan on a regular basis.
And
So are there consultants, I don't know much about the space, but that would help with the implementation of creating those blueprints, right? Which sounds like it's the next step. So actually creating the blueprint and.
I don't know about the blueprints, but I do know that there are consultants who help with some of the promotion and then things like dashboards, greenhouse gas inventories, and the like.
Yeah, and there are on the state list, energy consultants. We've used Beth Greenblatt. She worked with you on the, but there are others that focus just on this kind of thing. And I think they have been, pre-vetted and pre-bid through the state, and it might be possible to get a scope together and then negotiate or get proposals from three.
what I've seen, for example, and Joe had a question up too. I've seen towns do things where they say, we have $75,000 and this is what we want, and then everyone comes in at 74.9 and you pick the most qualified one.
Right.
So as I'm thinking about, where do we get the biggest bang for the buck from a consultant or from these working groups? I get we want to keep things high level, but again, I'm going back to reading the plans of Newton, Wellesley, Acton. They have all the things you need to do for building energy. They have the whole list. They have 20 things you need to do for building energy. What I'd like from a working group and a consultant is to say, what do we need to do with that same list of 20? We as our committee think that these are the top 3 or top 4. Flesh it out into an action plan. Like charge the working group or charge the consultant that says, how are we going to get to net zero for all new construction? What's the ordinance we need to write? What do we need to tell the planning committee, blah, 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 flesh it out for us. Let them do the real work. Like, we don't need more people coming up with these general, hey, here's all the things we need to do. Like, we know all the things we need to do. We have the lists, but, use the time and effort of the consultants to say, we prioritize these 3 or 4 things out of these 20. You can agree or disagree with us, but flesh out the next step of how we get to further an action plan on these areas, whether it's the community aggregation, whether it's electrification of municipal buildings, whether it's the water pump. What are the things we think that we want to prioritize? And then let's charge these folks to come up with some real actionable steps for us. Because I think the more time we spend, working groups, mobility, they're going to come back with the same 20 things that Acton had for mobility. It's very general. It's very high level. It doesn't get us any further down the path.
So Joe, are you suggesting that the ask for the fall town meeting should be that consultant who can get us to that next level?
Yeah, I think we would say, here, maybe take all those categories. I agree with you in the high level kind of overarching and say building energy efficiency, mobility, materials, but say, look, we looked at as our committee, the top 2 or 3 things in each of those buckets. This is where we want to mobilize maybe a work group, or maybe here's where we want to engage a consultant. And it doesn't have to be like across the board. We don't have to have 6 working groups across all the areas. Maybe it's like, here's 3 areas where maybe we have working groups. But maybe here's like the points where we need the consultant to really get us to either writing, help us write the ordinance, or the, how we want to do a socialization plan, or how we want to engage a development community around writing sort of a net zero principle. I'm just trying to think of, to be a little bit more targeted than to, again, boil the ocean. Because I think all these towns have done that. They've all boiled the ocean.
Consultant should be an implementation consultant.
Yeah, with the term be project managing, they would project manage it.
Right. Since we don't have that resource in town.
Yeah, but if, I think if you keep the scope small, and our recommendation is of all the things you could do, here's what we think are the top 7 or 8 across all those categories, and you project manage getting those 7 or 8 to the next level. And maybe it is engaging a working group and facilitating a work group around that area.
Yeah, I think the working group benefit is not necessarily getting to that level of implementation. I don't think they're gonna have the expertise without a consultant to do that. What they can do is they can probably surface the opportunities, the risks, the, what's in place, what's not in place in order to support these action items. But then probably an implementation consultant, if that's what you want to call it, would be necessary if you're talking about a blueprint. Here's the specific pathway that we take to get to completion.
I mean, in the consultant language, right, there's advise, there's implement, and then there's operate. We think we can do the advising on our own, is what I'm hearing. We need someone to help with the last 2, implement and operate. And operate might be our longer term play to say we need actually a full-time position to manage this.
But I think we do need some kind of assistance facilitating. We need working groups to bring in more constituencies. For example, if you want to talk about energy efficiency, we have to bring in people, both builders as well as we really would have to bring in both enterprise builders, somebody doing large commercial development, some of the existing things, different stakeholders to get them to say, yeah, we can work with this. And then we need somebody in some way, shape, or form to help us go beyond the working groups to the broader town and say, this is why we need this, as opposed to if we come out and say, do these 10 things, it could fall flat, right? It will fall flat.
So I'm hearing from you an emphasis on process, which I agree with. I think that bringing people into the process is critical. And I'm hearing from Joe that the output needs to be at a sufficient level of detail that it's actually actionable for the town, right? And so I don't think those are necessarily different.
Not at all.
Okay. So since we're short on time, I do think what we should probably aim for the next meeting is to have a project, like a draft project plan that we can all look at and validate. And maybe start to think about working that plan. So, if we're going to have working groups, what are they going to be organized around? Who's going to be participating in that? Could we think about who the nominations might be for the representation on those working groups as well? So I will take an action, and I'm looking for a volunteer to help me take what we've seen from the Wellesley plan and try to make it into an even plan. Anybody interested in stepping forward on that?
I'm interested in working on that with you, Stephen. If you'd like my help, I'd be interested in that.
Thank you, Artie. Anybody else interested?
Sure.
All right. All right. So Nick, Artie, and Stephen will work on a high-level project plan.
And I think if there's specific tasks that we want to assign to Andy to help you, that would be, and maybe since the two of you know each other, that I just ask that I be kept in the line of communication.
Absolutely.
That's why you're here. And I also noticed in the other attempt that Wellesley put together, they did have high school climate action club listed, and there has been interest expressed, and I think we should reach out to them. I don't know if it's the same faculty member who's supporting that group.
Hans Batra.
No, that would be something to get them, just make next year's agenda for that club be this.
Okay.
And get them to participate both individually, and maybe some of them are more interested in certain things and others. But it also, from looking at all of these, until we know where our overall emissions are coming from, we can't really prioritize the biggest bang for our buck, which is what, Joe, you're looking for. So we want to take the biggest piece of this pie and we want to target that. And it might actually be the most difficult piece because it's mostly not under the town control.
Right.
And so that's where community engagement and also reaching out through the programs that Green Needham Collaborative does already. The Solarize Needham, and I think cross advertising
Be helpful.
between that organization and what the town is doing is
So,
critical.
Ray, you're gonna be working with Cindy.
Yes, I'll create a communications plan for this group. to
And
look at.
so you can reach out to either me or Nick
Yeah.
about Green Needham and how
Okay.
to bring those two things together.
Yeah, great.
So,
That'll be part
Are
of
we
that.
still going to seek out consultants? Money and how much this costs, is that?
I think we should still do that. Yeah, that, I would think that it's still worthwhile figuring out what they've spent, what they got out of it, where the expertise was most highly valuable. Because we may decide that we need something. But I think we're gonna have to think about Q4. Like, what do we need in Q4? And what do we do before Q4 that obviously a consultant won't be able to help with us?
It'd be great too if somebody wants to give you the RFP that they issued for that consultant.
Yes.
Yes.
And then we could,
I think there's something there.
Or Paul, are you gonna take that task
That's my
on?
task, yes.
Okay.
Consultants.
I think what's gonna be really important as part of the planning is just thinking about what you want as an, what would be the structure to that working group in terms of deliverables, right?
Mhm.
And what form will that take? That will help us, I think.
So I'll see if I can get raw copies of what was delivered back to Mary Beth from the working groups. at the
And
end.
sort of that next level down of how they actually did that.
How they got
Like,
there.
in
Right.
week one, they agreed, they looked at the activity, I don't know, whatever it is, however they kind of structured that will be, I think, helpful for us.
Do we want to then have a one-page charge for each working group?
Might be useful.
Yeah.
So whoever on this committee is then going to take on each of the working groups could draft up that charge.
So that would be a good thing too. Actually, once we come back with the structure and the plan, we can ask who's interested in focusing in which areas.
Yeah.
So we only have a few minutes left, but I did want to share the results of the activity. And a quick health warning reminder, this was our opinions. And maybe we've crowdsourced the right data, but a consultant might know better than collectively we know. So this could be a good, I think, starting point if we organize the working groups around these themes. So what reminder, everybody ranked on a scale of 1 to 5, effort versus impact. Go to slide 2, Hank. And so what I did is I plotted them on the 2x2 that Joe had shared with us. I adapted the 2x2. It's not exactly the same axes, but impact versus effort. Top left are the high impact, low effort. So I color coded those green. Bottom right is the high effort, low impact. Not that we don't necessarily want to do those, but they take a lot of effort relative to impact, at least according to our opinion. And then the other two quadrants where they're low effort, low impact, which might kind of fall in the category of, just do it if you have the time. And the top right, high impact, high effort. Again, we might want to do it because of the high impact, but we probably have to plan those. There might be timing implications to those that we need to really think through.
And some of these might actually come through building code changes
Right.
so that all all new buildings have to be solar ready.
Exactly. So that might be the kind of conversation that the work group would say, hey, we could try really hard to pass a local ordinance to make
Mhm.
net zero energy buildings required for over 10,000 square feet. Or we could wait a year or 2 years and maybe the state will get us there, in which case
Or early adoption of the stretch code. which
that
is
might be a
still being-
recommendation.
I found myself in this exercise in terms of effort, when we were talking about things that the town could do. That, well, it's real easy for me to say that training town staff is low effort because it's, that's something I don't know about.
Yeah.
Because you're preaching to the choir here and not everyone
I tried to
can
do
harmonize.
I tried to do trim to means on these numbers, by the way, it's just too small of a data set to really make a difference. But yeah, that was the idea, because there were some variances where people said this is 5 or a 1, but most were coalescing around. So this is mobility. There's really no very high impact, low effort. But there's, number of different topics that they're relatively low effort and close to high impact, like promoting EV adoption or, electrifying our buses.
And the town is already talking about EVs and buses. School committee or school department is looking at a grant program to get their first electric bus.
Fantastic.
And likewise, the town, I think, is now required to at least investigate when they purchase any new vehicle, if there is an EV option.
That was the Green Communities program, right?
Yes.
So this is energy supply. So renewable portfolio standards. You can CEA is right there up at the top, which is I think where it should probably be. It's not high effort. It's not low effort either. And then governance. Sustainability coordinator, top right. Natural resources. Zero waste. So I've loaded this up onto the SharePoint. I do think this kind of gets back to our categories, what our work streams might be. And you can imagine that working groups would maybe want to start here, but dig into the ones that are high impact first, and try to prioritize them in a kind of plan. It was interesting. I hope you guys found it interesting. I can give you the raw data if you're interested in looking at the numbers underneath it. Just see who seems to be very bullish on the level of effort for the town and who feels it's.
Well, it might be interesting to share this with the department heads that we're going to be talking to.
Yeah.
And see what kind of feedback they would be giving.
That's true.
It's a good hypothesis, I think.
Yeah.
I'd love to see on this one to hear what the RTS folks have to say about some of this.
Or when Andy works on his pump project and you put it over in the little brown one.
Yeah.
And he starts working on it and it's gonna be over there or something, because the reality is.
Yeah.
The intervention might be more.
Yeah.
Is kind of my opinion.
We were crowdsourcing on very, very limited information with a number of people who don't have any expertise in these areas. So
But it's a great start.
take it with a grain of salt.
That's great. That's great.
What I think is interesting is that as a society, many times we've done things where they've publicly been out there and seemed like they've, had, I guess I use the word, had a big impact, but in reality, they really haven't had a big impact on our environmental impact on the earth, related to some of our recycling aspects, or converting from plastic straws to paper straws, things like that. I'm not meaning to downplay paper because I don't use plastic straws, but from the impact of the whole world as itself, it's not making a big difference, but it kind of has the PR aspect to it So there's things that have PR, but there's things that's gonna actually make a difference. And, and so it will be nice to go through, get through the PR stuff and really have a big impact. For example, we talk about expanding the bottle bill, and it's in the lower left-hand corner. So it falls in my brain, that falls into the category, well, low impact, low effort type of thing, where that's where it's falling. And so as far as society, it's in my brain that kind of falls into the PR category of it's great to do, it's great to have, but there's so much more we have to do to where our energy is and what we have to do. So that when I look at that, that's just what's going through my brain of what we've done in the world and where we have to go. That's all.
So I think that's the last topic today. Hank, do we have anything else?
Just to remind people that our next meeting is on a Wednesday, the 13th of July at 6 p.m. and we're at Town Hall. We're not here.
Okay,
So we're in the select board chambers
Yes.
at Town Hall.
okay.
And then we go back to a Monday meeting in August, which is August 15th. And that's 6 p.m. and that's in this. And that's at the bottom of the agenda.
Do we need to make a September meeting? How far out should we try to do that regularly or?
Wouldn't hurt.
Follow that pattern, we'd be the 12th, September 12th. Is that for everybody or are there other meetings?
The 12th. That work for everyone?
Confirm on the town calendar and make sure there's no conflict.
What time?
6 p.m.
6.
What's the date again? Next meeting?
Monday, September 12th. So we have Monday, August 15th. I'll read it back. I'll go back. July 13th, August 15th, and September 12th. So just that work done, we need one last motion. I think. We have a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second. All those in favor? Opposed? All right. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Bye, thank you.
Thanks. everyone.
Thanks, bud.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, guys.
Good luck.
Feel better.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Okay.